Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women and our active accomplices. I'm your host, Sarah Elder Chaminara, and today I have two guests, both from the Council of Alberta University students, which if you're not familiar with, they represent over 114,000 undergraduate students from the University of Alberta, Lethbridge, Mount Royal, MacEwan, Athabasca, to the public, government, and other post-secondary education stakeholders. They're based in Edmonton, but one of our guests today is joining us from Lethbridge. But what their main cause is, they're a non-partisan and active advocacy group driven by members to ensure fully accessible and a high-quality system of education in Alberta, which is something I think we should all be on board with. And today, my guests are Chris Beasley, who's the chair of the Council of Alberta University Students. Chris, do you pronounce it CAUS, or is there like a?
It's just CAUS, yeah.
It's just CAUS. Okay, I didn't want to goof up on that one right away. And you're the VP External for the U of A Students Union. You've got a BA in Poli-Sci, which obviously is. I'm Team Poli-Sci. You're the former president of the University of Arts Undergraduate Society, and you have a lot of experience. But one thing I definitely want to touch on or highlight is that you were a page in the legislature and a tour guide. So that's like a million gold stars. And it says in your bio, one of your passions includes get out the vote initiatives, which like you speak so many of my love languages. And our other guest today is Rachel Preston, and Rachel is the VP External for the University of Lethbridge Students Union. Rachel is currently doing a combined degree in general science and mathematics, less my strong areas of academia, but still obviously fully team women in science and STEAM. You've been involved in student leadership in different ways, including being the VP of Internal for the University of Lethbridge's Education Undergraduate Society. And you are passionate about teaching. And when I read this, I just had to pause and smile because you're passionate about Robert's Rules of Order, which is just outstanding. I just don't know how to, it's not often you see those kinds of things in people's bios. I wish there was more of it.
Yeah, I actually have Robert's Rules book and pamphlet currently in front of me. So
wow,
big fan.
Do you travel with those?
Sometimes.
Good to know. Okay. Well, if like board governance, that's maybe a whole other podcast, especially in the context of student union politics. We won't get into that today because we're specifically speaking about a report that was released on August 30th, a very serious report, actually, that the government of Alberta released on sexual and gender-based violence in Alberta post-secondary post-secondary education. And so Chris and Rachel, whoever wants to jump in on this. Chris, why don't you go first? Can you explain what the report is, and then Rachel, maybe about some of the high-level findings and how CAUS has responded?
So Rachel and I we are the current generation of student leaders, but this conversation started a long time ago. It was a few years back that, and for a decade, more than a decade now, we've known that this is a huge issue of campus sexual and gender-based violence. You can't take these roles without students telling you about the supports that they need, the services that they need, telling you stories that break your heart, that absolutely destroy you. And then you have to go and advocate on that. And that's so often our roles. And so a few years back, some of my predecessors worked with Minister of Advanced Education at the time, Dimitrios Nicolaides, to commission Legislature to run a survey across all 26 post-secondary institutions in Alberta to collect data, to get just a check on what the data looks like across all 26 post-secondary institutions. We had sporadic data. We had data from the from the University of Alberta Students Union. We had data from other areas, but this is our first province-wide picture. And the conversation that happened a few years ago was that we need the province-wide picture so that we can start having the Advanced Education Ministry take up the responsibility of province-wide prevention. And so as of a week ago, that picture is finally out from the province-wide survey. We had almost 13,000 students respond, and these students, I mean, they came forward and they told us what I think all student leaders knew to be true, but what's shocking and staggering to most of the Albertan public, which is that half of all students were assaulted or harassed during their time at university, so experienced sexual or gender-based violence. 74% of queer students were sexually harassed or assaulted during their times at university. And yeah, like the Council of Alberta University Students is an advocacy organization. We represent our students. We represent survivors. We're all friends with survivors. We all have them in our circles and as loved ones. And so our job is to make sure that this report comes out and is dealt with the gravitas that it requires, making sure that, and I know you mentioned this in the lead up to the podcast, Sarah, that it comes out and doesn't just disappear, that we talk about this. And we're not policy experts. We're advocates and we're students, and we fight for the attention that this deserves. And that's what we're seeing right now, is us trying to get as much attention and eyes on this as possible.
Rachel, what has been the response so far specifically from government?
From government, we have been engaging in many conversations with the Minister of Advanced Education. Chris has done an amazing job at making sure that our messages from CAUS is getting out there loud and proudly. We are currently running a fun little social media campaign from our CAUS Instagram page, things of those sorts. And we are really engaging in conversations around how we use this to form a solution, not just say that, yeah, we did the research, we're good now. And so we're really looking at working with the ministry to sort of create a working group based on the findings from this report. Because as Chris has said, like, we currently are students. We've been on these campuses. We've seen this happen. Like, we know that this is the culture around it, and we need students at the table when decisions are being made around policies on these things. And the first way to do that is a working group initiated by the ministry with students, with government officials, and with what is the word? Professional. What is the word, Chris?
Yeah, industry leaders.
That's
the stakeholders who do this, 40 hours a week and who are experts in this. We're talking about the Alberta Association of Sexual Assault Centers and organizations like that.
Yeah, and really just like engaging in a conversation of like what policies currently look like, how policies can change to better protect our students. We are also asking the Ministry of Advanced Education to dedicate funds to both the currently like existing prevention plans, as well as supporting survivors at all of the post-secondaries across Alberta. And finally, we are hoping that the Ministry of Advanced Education will also sponsor a province-wide campaign about consent education in Alberta, because the more that people know what consent looks like and how to use it in everyday conversation, the more it becomes normalized and regular, and people understand what it looks like. It's not just in romantic relationships, like it's in every moment, everyday interactions. So as long as we can educate students on that right from the get-go, we can start seeing improvements.
Well, honestly, as a mom, so I have two kids, they're 4 and one just turned 6. And I can tell you that I believe that consent education begins pretty much from birth. In some ways, although teaching it at all stages of life is very valid and very necessary, but honestly, it starts like, around like, can I touch your baby without just, right? Like that informs so much of what we understand around personal boundaries and limitations and what different people are comfortable with. And then as you get older, definitely around like intimate relationships and just in everyday interactions, whether do you like shaking hands? Are you a hugger? All those kinds of different things. So yeah, I'm totally on. I think there would be a lot of support for that. As much as CAUS is a non-partisan organization, these issues, because we're working with governments who are political parties, and the environment of politics is rather highly charged here in Alberta. So how are you going to navigate keeping the politics out of something that the three of us agree on is just a fundamental building block of what should be included in terms of, the education system. So how are you going to go about that?
So I think it's an interesting thing, and it's something that I have to talk a lot about, especially with students. Like, we are a highly political organization. We take political stances, lower tuition, freezing tuition, supporting folks. All of those have been politicized because, as a poli-sci major as well, I tend to fall back on the poli-sci 101. Everything is political.
Yes.
But it's about recognizing as well that, like, we'll work with anybody. Because everybody cares about this. Minister Nicolaides was the one who took these first steps to make us a policy leader here in Alberta. And so now we're identifying the next funding shortfall. We had, at the time that the survey was commissioned, some money was given out so that universities could update their policy. And we've been recognized by a number of national organizations as having some of the best policy as for campus sexual violence here in Alberta and the country. And so there's good evidence of folks caring about this because it's something that needs to be cared about. That funding that was released has now been eaten up by the survey. Like, it was to basically run the survey and to update policy. And so now the bottleneck is, okay, we have good policy, but good policy doesn't prevent violence. Yeah. And so even though we're pushing this political goal, it's not a political goal that, to your point, Sarah, anybody has been disagreeing with so far. It's just a question of finding the money. It's just a question of working with the minister, meeting the minister at the table, and seeing what we can do.
That is a very good answer to a question. You can go. You could have answered a lot of ways, and you did a really good job of finding a middle ground. And I really, as someone who has political opinions and has worked in partisan politics and now is trying to find a balance of advocating for women and marginalized people to be more active in elected and unelected levels of politics. I do think that the message of we'll work with anyone who's willing to advance our cause is something that people need to hear, because there is a lot of difficulty around that sometimes, because, they'll be like, oh, I won't work with that person because we don't happen to agree, or I don't, we don't agree on everything, but that's something, I think that's very pragmatic and something that we need to see more of in a increasingly polarized world. So I thought it was really interesting in the report, and anyone can actually go online and read the report. You can even just Google gender and sexual based violence report Alberta, and it should pop up. I thought on page 9, it was interesting. So in terms of attitudes and beliefs about sexual or gender based violence, and some of the results were kind of shocking to me, but also not in some ways. So, do you believe, for example, false reports of sexual assaults are rare? So overwhelmingly, 28% of people that were surveyed said they disagree, 18% were neutral, 38% agreed, and 16% didn't know or preferred not to answer. Things got a little bit more sticky, I would say. If an individual is drunk, they might sexually assault someone unintentionally. 50% disagreed, but then almost equally at 40% between neutral and agreed with that answer. And, these are, along with consent, these questions kind of, around what are maybe even more morals and beliefs that inform kind of the way people respond to these questions, is that these also need to be tackled, because they're conversations that are delicate and sensitive, but also on college campuses, for example, people drink, and you need to be aware of that. And the element of victim shaming and victim blaming is too prevalent in our society. The response is usually, like, she shouldn't have been wearing that. She shouldn't have been drinking that much. They shouldn't have been in that place at that time. And it's actually not up to the person who received the unwanted attention or behavior, because it is unwanted. It's the person on the other side of this who's committing those acts or saying those things. So is there going to be a focus on the prevention aspect of this, for people to understand that these behaviors aren't acceptable? And like, how would you communicate that to the student body?
Yeah, so that definitely, I think, relates back to sort of the culture on our campuses a lot, and the culture around post-secondary and things of those sorts. And it was really interesting timing that this survey actually came out when it did, because we are entering what's called the red zone on our campuses, which is approximately the first 2 to 3 weeks of the semester after you move in, after the semester starts going, where there's the highest increase of these incidences on campus, because students are moving away from home. They're sort of getting that first opportunity to like be an independent adult, get themselves into situations like those types of things. And that's where a lot of the culture shift has to come. So if we can create an actual campus culture where it's like, hey, if you don't know, the answer is no. Like if you aren't a confident yes, it's a no, and things of those sorts, and recognizing that like if there's any sort of intoxication, it's still a no. Like that's what it is. Because there are so many students who come to campus and they're just like, this is what all my friends told me about university. This is okay. But it's not. And it comes down to the preventative measures are the education measures as well.
Well, again, with my mom hat on, I'd also think, I think that there's a very valid prong in this, in whatever, if there's what strategy comes out of this, is on the parent or the guardian piece of this as well. In setting, having those maybe tough but awkward and really necessary. Well, they shouldn't be tough or awkward, to be honest. But for some people, they would be conversations around, consent and, drinking culture and drinking behavior. And, like, this is how much you can drink. Maybe you're going to test your boundaries, but making sure that parents are also involved, because as a parent, sometimes I see, reporting on really tragic circumstances, and the parents are like, oh no, my kid would never do that. That's not my kid. My kid is, a straight A student, a hockey player, let's say, someone who's, my baby. They would never do this. And that's also harmful, because it continues to perpetrate the idea of, of victim shaming and victim blaming, but also passes the buck on accountability, often from people who are the biggest accountability, quote unquote, people. So just food for thought in terms of that as well. But so how do you, at the University of Lethbridge, how do you deal with this? Because I've never heard the term Red Week before. As someone who's never lived on campus, what is this Red Week?
Yeah, so red zones exist on
zone.
No, it's all good. They exist on all post-secondary campuses, because we all sort of get started in the year right around the same time. So basically the entire month of September is like, if things are going to go wrong, they're going to go wrong within those first 3 weeks. And from my experience sort of living on campus and things of those sorts, like when you enter that first start of red zone, you become hyper aware of it. You're constantly checking in on those first years. You're constantly like, you become so hyper vigilant of what's happening on campus, because you know sort of what time of year you're in. And when it comes to sort of the social events like welcome week, things of those sorts, there's more security officers present. There's more sort of safety measures put in place, things of those sorts. There's always like things like that. I know on the University of Lethbridge campus, like we have a safe walk program, so you can be anywhere on campus and you can contact Safe Walk, and you will have 2 security officers come and they will walk you from any point to any point on campus so that you are protected, things of those sorts. I know that we are very lucky here at the University of Lethbridge to have a sexual and gender-based violence prevention coordinator on our campus. So she does a lot during this red zone on consent culture, things of those sorts, going to give presentations in classes, talking to students, like really being out, telling people where her office is, what resources she has available. But not every post-secondary institution has somebody like that. And we serve approximately 8,000 undergraduate students on our campus, and we have one person to do all of that. And so that's a lot. And so it really is just, how can we set up safety nets to protect these students? How can we set it up so that they're safe? Because if something happens this week, they have to live with that for the next 8 months, and they might not come back. Or it happens this week and they just go, I can't do this anymore, and they just don't go to school. So from a student leader perspective, it's okay, how do we protect these students right now and moving forward? Not when we have time, because the time is now. Yeah.
I don't know if maybe you can tell me if you feel my frustration sometimes, because I've been on social media and I've had ads target me, for example, for like a personal security alarm. So like some, they make it look like jewelry. So it's like supposed to be an attractive, piece of equipment that makes noise to alert someone to me being attacked. And I get really frustrated with that because I don't feel like the onus should be on me or anyone who is simply existing in the world for being who they are, but are being targeted for exactly those same reasons. Like how do you both navigate this kind of the landscape of the culture that we're in personally, outside of, and maybe because it might inform your roles in student government, and with CAUS as well. How do you both manage that when you're on campus?
I think the most tragic thing about this is that so often that personal onus is put on folks to not be victimized. But to your point earlier, Sarah, like it takes two actors in this situation. It's not just about whether you are vulnerable. It is someone else who is there to prey on that vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And the real problem with, I think, marketing like jewelry that can make a loud noise is that so often that obfuscates or moves away from what the majority of these interactions look like. They might start out consensual, but end non-consensual. They are so often intimate partner violence. They're more often someone that you know. It's shifting that conception, especially on campus, from being one of, some random act of violence to being something so much more heartbreaking and so much more tragic. And so the report talks a little bit about how students are often creating those cultures of support for themselves. The percentages of students that reach out to the person who's perpetrated or committed harm and had a conversation with them afterwards, I think is really indicative of just how often it's somebody that has committed harm, and how often students are then taking up that responsibility of safety, not only for their friends, but for future actions. And then as well, how often you just get a call from a friend where something terrible has happened and you just head over to their place as quickly as you can just to sit with them and process emotions and work through what happened. And it's so heartbreaking, but it's happened. I've been on campus for a long time, and it's happened too many times. And that's why CAUS is being so loud on this, because it's happened to so many people. I don't know, Rochelle, if there's anything else there.
Yeah, I think it definitely is it's hard, obviously, and especially being in the body of a woman in these spaces obviously makes it an additional challenge. And it is very difficult, and sort of the work around being vigilant and helping keep the community safe while also keeping myself safe. And recognizing like the role that an active bystander plays, so like actively like intervening. And I too have been on campus for quite a few years, so I also have been in those situations where I've received a text from a friend and been like, hey, I need somebody. And just like in that moment, just like having to stop what's happening and go and hold that space for them, because they just don't know what else to do with it, right? And just it's hard because the report says like 50%, but that's 50% of almost 13,000 students. It's more than that, and that's just reported, right? Like that's
we know that it's underreported.
Yeah, like it's more prevalent than the data shows, which is so heartbreaking. And really, like if you sit for a moment and you think about it, chances are you know somebody who's been on the receiving end of sexual or gender-based violence. And that's too many. I think that CAUS has taken a very firm stance on like student safety is priority number one, and one student is one too many. So if we can do work to make sure that our students are safe in accessing the education that they're paying for, then that's what we need to do, because nobody deserves to live in fear when they're trying to grow their horizons.
I agree. Well, because something happens during, your first year of university or college, or at any point in your life, really, but that's something you carry with you forever. And that's not something I think that I would hope that we could, like the entire world would mutually agree on, that no one should have to carry that with them for the rest of their lives. Like that is an insane tragedy, of epic proportions. And, in terms of the world that we're creating and the spaces that we live in, it should just be simply unacceptable.
And to Rochelle's point as well, like, so when we talk about the red zone, the red zone different advocates define it differently, but those that tend to define it as being the first 6 weeks. There was a statistic, I think, from 2018, so a little bit old now, that said that almost half of all assaults happen during that red zone, those first 6 weeks. And the red zone is particularly, those that are most likely to be victimized in the red zone are women in their first and second year. So again, it's that carrying it forward for the entire year. And that's why even when the report shows this is an Alberta-wide problem, that we need campus-specific resources, because Rochelle alluded to this earlier, but if this is just people you meet on move-in day and they live across the hall from you and they've perpetrated harm, and then you don't know where to go to report that, don't know when you report that, whether it's going to be a survivor-centric approach to that process, whether you'll be able to get them moved, whether you'll be able to get them put somewhere else, whether you'll be able to create distance, whether you'll be able to heal from that. To Rochelle's point, so many people just drop out because you carry it with you, especially when it happens in your first and second year, in the first 2 to 6 weeks of university.
Well, and the report touches on some things that can be done. So increasing awareness of supports available. So ones that already exist, which is good. It talks about bystander intervention training, which is super critical. I think that's a really important piece, as well as how to report, how to prevent sexual and gender-based violence. So when, as you're, pressing the ministry for the working group, what specifically are you, besides the working group, because that they have to agree to set that up in the first place. So that would be the first win, right? In terms of what specifically, a couple of things that you'd be specifically hoping to see or advocate for at that table. And then my second question is, have you reached out to, because education is a provincial responsibility, and this is in no way isolated to Alberta at all, which you both are very much aware of. So in terms of, creating a broader coalition of student organizations, student unions from across the country, and making more of a collected press, has there been any discussion of that?
I can take the second part of that question. Sure. So both Chris and I are also a part of the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, which is a federal body that represents over 300,000 students from across Canada. And we have been engaged in conversations with our colleagues in that organization from across the country about, hey, what do the things look like on your campus? What are you doing? How are we pushing this forward? And they, because of this survey, we are one of the first, I think we might be the first province to do a province-wide survey on sort of not the first, one of the first.
For those of you listening on an audio medium, I shook my head. Ontario one as well. It was commissioned under Kathleen Wynne's government and then came out under Doug Ford's government. But that's, sorry, random, my encyclopedic knowledge of.
I'm happy Alberta is second.
Yeah, so
I'll take it.
Yeah, one of the first. So it's hard because they, like Chris had mentioned, politicians and governments love the data. And so there's not a lot of data out there for province-wide scopes. And so there's not a lot of things that are happening in other provinces right now, but we are seeing a large push from our federal colleagues to help push for Alberta to do something to set the standard, to set the precedents, which has been amazing to see, being able to rely on a room full of student leaders who are like, hey, our students aren't okay. Let's get this going now. Let's solve this now. Kind of thing. We're not sitting here and waiting around. And that's been really awesome. So we do have a large room of student leaders helping make the push, but we can always use more people getting our voices louder.
And to that point as well, I've been in communication with members of the Ontario Students Alliance. Ooh, they're going to text me if I get that wrong. About the conversations that they had with the Doug Ford government when their report came out, because their report showed very similar numbers to ours. And so in the lead up to this, we were expecting numbers like this. And that's why student leaders are really repeating the phrase that this is staggering and this is shocking, but this isn't surprising, because the data's out there. I think it was the Our Campus, Our Voices survey, if anybody wants to follow up on that after the podcast. But to your first question, Sarah, on what we're going to be pushing at the working group, in terms of the areas, really, there's always more policy work that needs to be done. There's always more of that. But really, a lot of the conclusions that people have come to, and a lot of the policy workers, especially at my university and a lot of the universities that I've talked to, feel shackled just by the lack of funding. They're incredibly smart people. They have found and identified the policy solutions to what this is, and there is no money forthcoming. My university alone has lost $220 million in Government of Alberta cuts. We are emaciated. We have laid off so many staff. One of the most tragic things that we learned in this process was that one of the reasons why students feel like they have fewer avenues to report is simply because there are fewer staff on university campuses. And so people are less likely to know who and where to go to. And so one of the reasons why we're really asking for provincial leadership on this is because obviously it's a provincial problem, but also because I know that I'm going to go to my institution. I'm going to tell them, and I have been already working with them to develop a plan for how we respond to these survey results. There was immediate funding sent to the Sexual Assault Center as soon as this report was released at the University of Alberta. Our university has been doing good and showing leadership on this. But if every dollar that goes towards this comes out of someone's paycheck, comes out of someone's salary, comes out of student services in another area, if this truly is a crisis, and it is, then it's a provincial responsibility. And the other aspect to that is we can't do it sporadically. My university freed up money instantly. Great. That's one out of the 26 post-secondary institutions. I use a teacher example because we're blessed to have Rochelle with us. But if 26 students in a math class all fail the test, at a certain point, you have to start looking at the teacher, and you have to start asking what the province can do, and not just making this an institutional and individual responsibility. For student leaders to continue to fight the fight on an individual case-by-case basis, where students who go to different institutions who transfer receive sporadic results and sporadic support depending on how much each institution has decided to implement the recommendations listed in this work.
So new money, not a reallocation, not taking it from somewhere else and moving it, working within an existing budget. New money.
New money.
New money. New money.
And honestly, not that much. That's the other thing. Like in the scale of provincial governments, it costs $8.7 million to run mental health clinics all across our publicly funded research universities. It would not be more than $5 million to be able to do a true prevention strategy across all campuses. There was a $13 billion surplus. We can find the money.
Well,
Sorry.
so much of it comes down to a matter, in my opinion, of will. Is there the political will, or are you willing to use your political capital at the cabinet table, and advocating, going to Treasury Board and really pushing for something for like this, having worked as a staffer. Actually, the last minister I worked for in BC was the Minister of Advanced Education. And so, making the push, so much of it is tied to, is the minister interested in this? Do they really fully understand the issue? Are staff supportive? I mean, political staff, not just bureaucracy, but, so how can people, I'll wrap up by saying, for anyone who's listening to this podcast and is maybe hearing about the report for the first time, or, but understands the importance of the issue and who is also an advocate for the elimination of gender and sexual-based violence, not only on college and university campuses, but just in general from our society. How can they help you, if it's, and broadly speaking, if it's in Alberta, Ontario, Quebec, PEI, wherever they may be, how can they advance this issue? How can they advocate for students in this way that would be a benefit to you?
I've got a pretty simple call to action, which is email the Minister of Advanced Education. I know that the audience that I'm speaking to are politically involved folks, and
they're good. They're amazing Googlers.
Amazing Googlers.
Yes.
Google the Minister of Advanced Education's email and just cold email them and be like, hi.
Yeah.
Matters to me. We need two things. We need investment in campus sexual violence support specifically. And students are saying that we need a working group that brings together students, institutions, and industry leaders. Those are both good things. Let's make this happen.
Can I add a third thing? Because this is what I find to be having at times been responsible for going over correspondence received in ministers' offices. I can tell you that one of the best things you need to always do as a best practice is ask for follow-up. Never just send an email saying, I mean, you can, I'm not saying don't do it, but go add that one extra sentence and say, I would like to hear back from your office or you on specifics around this issue, or I would like to request a meeting. Like there has to add an ask in terms of what you hear back from them, because otherwise it just gets filed.
Thank you so much.
That's a good piece of advice coming from the inside right there.
Well, no, because it creates like a greater amount of accountability, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also very validating for the person writing or emailing or calling, whatever it may be. Always have an ask, always end the conversation, or at some point mention, just don't let them off the hook. That's the biggest thing. We let them off the hook too easily. They're elected by us. They are accountable to us. They get to keep their jobs because of us. We need to, they're accountable. They need to be held accountable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to keep paying attention to this issue and to see what else comes out of this. I would love to maybe have Chris and Rachel, or another dynamic duo from CAUS on maybe some other issues like tuition or increased funding, which we definitely touched on for post secondary institutions, because there are so many issues that student unions are really passionate about, and it shouldn't only be at back to school that we talk about them.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. We're always welcome and always ready to talk more about that.
Yeah, that would be amazing. So thank you so much.
We're passionate about student issues. That wasn't included in the list, but we are.
Well, if maybe it's just me making broad strokes, but anyone who's passionate about Robert's Rules of Order, and someone who was a tour guide at the legislature and a page, I feel the synergy. I feel like there is overlap on those things. So I wish everyone was engaged as the two of you, and it's, as a geriatric millennial, like the baton has to keep being passed, right? To create the next generation of advocates and leaders in student politics and politics in general, and in science and in every field, really.
And really, like, we're doing this, and we're, if I can say this, like, Rochelle and I are good at this because we have to be, because no one's going to give us space. No one else is going to run with this story. Like, we have allies in you, Sarah, and in folks like you, but realistically, there was a world in which this report was released. The government's title was "Win for Safety, Report Released."
Oh my gosh.
And that was going to be it, unless we take up space and we do work ourselves. And so, like, I'm so thankful to have people like Rochelle at my side who work so hard because we have to, because otherwise people don't give us this oxygen.
Well, and let me tell you, I meet a lot of people who are advocates in a lot of different ways, everything from like maternal health to, women in STEM to like business, construction, like the health specifically I'm thinking of. But it's there, and they become the best advocates for themselves and, their families. And it's not because they want to your point, it's because they have to. And I wish that we lived in a world where people, obviously I want people to be informed and to advocate for themselves, but I wish we didn't need people to be as strong as they are.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Let's stay in touch and keep up the good work.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having us, Sarah. We really appreciated the opportunity to come on and speak.
Oh, no, it was lovely meeting you. And maybe one day if you're ever in Calgary, or if I ever happen to be in Lethbridge or in Edmonton, the arch rival of Calgary, I will let you know.
Sounds good.
Thanks.